Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to get ready to begin. I know we're all, doing the family thing that we do here in the Virgin Islands, greeting and saying hello and engaging. Good afternoon. Can you say it back? Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tioni Scotland. I am Congresswoman Plaskett's Communications Director, and it is a pleasure, a really, really deep honor to welcome all of you to our panel discussion, which the Congresswoman is hosting in honor of our 175th Emancipation. Can we hear it? Let's give it up for that. Tremendous, tremendous. I'd like to think about the ancestors looking at us and looking at the progress that we make in our individual lives, and I want to believe that they'd be pleased, even with the obstacles that we face. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. It is my honor also to introduce our Congresswoman, our wonderful, fearless superwoman, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Many, many blessings to each one of you. We have a lot to do this afternoon, and I'm so glad that we have so many people who are out here on a Saturday afternoon. I know there's so many places you could be, and I'm really grateful that you decided to come and spend some time with us to have this discussion about where we have been, where we are now, and where we are going. And this is a discussion that I know that we all have internally with ourselves, among our close friends, but having it as a community is something that we need to have periodically. And I can think of no better time than the celebration of the victory of our ancestors over their own oppressors that brought them and brought us to the place where we are right now. We have some tremendous collaborators who have been working with us, and I'm still looking for some others to be here who are going to be part of the discussion later on. A special presentation that we wanted to do for some of our elders and some of the young people who've been carrying this on for many years. But I just want to set the stage for you all as to what we're going to be doing here. We have a group of panelists, and I've got a lot of millennials in my office, and they were like, oh, we want to hear from millennials about how they feel about. I was like, what about us Gen Xers? What about us? What about us? We're like the forgotten generation or something going on around here. So what we decided to do was we are going to have an elder set the stage for us and talk about our past. And that will be with Michael Turland and our own Gerard Emanuel. And then we're going to go into two panels with former Senator Michael Turland bringing panelists to have a discussion about how emancipation affects their lives. How do they see it interacting in the lives that they live right now? And then we are going to have interspersed with that, our Saida Carter has done tremendous work with working with some of the elders, working with the young people to have them interpret how they feel about emancipation and what they saw emancipation as through their own artistic interpretation. We'll let her share that. I feel so blessed that I have had parents who shared the stories with me. My mother left St. Croix at a very young age, at 13, finished high school in New York City, and so was a little bit removed from it. But she married her elementary school sweetheart. He wasn't her sweetheart, but he didn't realize he was her sweetheart. But she recognized very early on that she was going to marry my dad, and he was the storyteller. And he had a mom, gratefully, who was not afraid of telling unvarnished truths. Sometimes our elders have tried to gloss over things or made things sound prettier than they were. He was fortunate. My grandmother was very unapologetic about her life, about how people were related to each other, what those relationships really were, how we could trace ourselves back, and what our stories were. And I can recall just several years ago, I had a friend who's from the States, And he asked me, how are you like so confident in Congress when you question certain people? Like you're questioning a billionaire and you're pressing him on issues and you are very confident about that. And I was like, because I know who I come from. I know who my ancestors are. I know what they were able to do with much less than what I've been given. And so that has allowed me to be able to speak in the manner that I do to people because I know from whence I came. I know who my people are. I know what they accomplished. And I think that that's a story that we all need to have. You know, we're grateful in some ways that the Danish were very meticulous about making their money. And so we have records that many people don't have. Many Africans of the diaspora do not have what we have. And so we really need to dig into that. And that's the other part of what we're going to present. I'm going to share with you all at some point, we're going to have some video greetings, but also I tapped into a young man that has been, well, he's not a young man anymore, but a gentleman who's living on St. Thomas by the name of Bill Perkins. And several years ago, Bill decided that he's into algorithms, and he uses that for his business and private equity. And he collected from around the United States auction records and slave runaway advertisements. And from that information, he's been able to create charts across the United States of what time of year slaves ran, based on weather conditions, why slaves ran in the places that they ran throughout the United States. And so he has, for our emancipation, done the same with records that he was able to find in the Virgin Islands, on slave auctions, on ships that were coming in, on runaway advertisements for the Virgin Islands, and has created charts and has an interactive website that he has produced for the Virgin Islands Emancipation that we're going to show you later today. So with that, I can't wait. I want to call up my good friend, our history teacher, always once a history teacher, always a history teacher, Mr. Turlan, to come up and begin the moderation. But as he's coming up, we are going to have a video greeting from some of my colleagues who wanted to greet the people of the Virgin Islands. On this first one, there's a little time delay, so please bear with us. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Congressman Stephen Horsford, and I'm proud to represent Nevada's 4th Congressional District and to serve as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Today, we commemorate the 175th anniversary of the Virgin Islands Emancipation. On July 3rd, 1848, the enslaved people of St. Croix demanded their liberation. Their brave act led to the Virgin Islands Emancipation, marking one of the only successful organized revolts in the Western Hemisphere. As a Caribbean American with roots in Trinidad and Tobago, this story profoundly resonates with me and aligns with my mission in the Congressional Black Caucus. Today, we acknowledge the Virgin Islanders' spirit of resilience, a testament to their strength, determination, and will to overcome adversity. I'm honored to work alongside Representative Plaskett, delegate for the U.S. Virgin Islands, in the House, in our mutual commitment to justice and equality. Virgin Islanders, through their strength and talent, continue to shine in various fields around the globe. They demonstrate the power of unity and bravery in overcoming brutal realities and crafting their own destiny. Their legacy inspires us to continue our advocacy for freedom, justice, and equality.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I'm glad everybody's here today. My name is Michael Talan, and welcome, welcome, welcome all of y'all. I'm excited. How y'all? Y'all excited to be here? Yes, yes. You know, Congresswoman Plaskett set the stage for this panel discussion today, and I'm just happy that we were able to do some planning to give a different twist to our emancipation celebration and get the voices of different aspects of our community in terms of some young people who have been doing some great things, both here in the Virgin Islands and abroad. And having said that, I'd like to introduce the panel. First, I would like to call up Mr. Gerard Emmanuel. You can come up and take a seat here on the podium. Today, Mr. Emmanuel is going to be our historian in residence here at, I'm not going to read the bios. They are in your program that you have. So, but I'm going to call out who's on the panel. Of course, I already called Mr. Gerard Emmanuel. We also have Ms. Joanna Bermudez, Dr. Hadia Sewer, Mr. Tariq Macmillan, Ms. Tiffany Yannick, and Ms. Shalana Brown. I'm going to pose this first question to Mr. Emmanuel to give us just something about, set the stage for what we're going to be talking about here today. And I want to know, Mr. Emmanuel, in what ways did the abolition of slavery in 1848 impact the cultural and ethnic makeup of the Danish West Indies and subsequently influence the demographics and identity of the U.S. Virgin Islands?
Thank you very much for the question. My honest answer is I really don't know. But I can speculate. I would say that in the long run, it caused the Virgin Islands to have to bring in other persons to work. Because when slavery ended, all of the Africans didn't want to go back and work on the same plantation. They were free. Some wanted to go into work in town. So the planters realized that they had a labor shortage. So they brought in people from Barbados and Trinidad and Antigua and St. Kitts and every place except off the earth. And they became one in this community. And on October 1st, we're going to celebrate the next biggest event in the Virgin Islands. Well, 1733 was really the biggest. Okay. So I can't leave out the St. Jonians because according to Hall, that was the only complete revolution. So even though we love 1848 so much, it was an incomplete revolution. And just give me a little chance here to say that, right? Why was it incomplete? He said we didn't turn the wheel completely around. Like Haiti. They weren't satisfied with just being freed from slavery. They took over the government. Now, we're not blaming our ancestors for doing that, but we're just saying that is a fact. Still, 1848 was the greatest event that we had in the Virgin Islands. And after that, I said people were brought in. And when we had the fire burn, who were some of the people that were killed? Not just people who were Banya, people from Barbados, people from Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, all over the place, because at that time, we all were in the same boat. These are inconvenient things. Today, and back in the 60s and 70s, Virgin Islands felt that we were a little better because we were part of the U.S. Talk the truth. That wasn't the case back in 1878. We all were in the same economic boat. So we were all one, and they died in those events, especially 1878 for us. So one of the biggest things that happened is that we had a population that was very cosmopolitan. from all over the Caribbean. People didn't really matter, it didn't matter much where it came from. Of course, the Barbadians were always the butt of the jokes. I don't know why, but I guess people were jealous of them because they seemed to be more British than everybody else. But anyhow, when we came into the 20th century, things got really serious. We got people like David Hamilton Jackson, Rochelle Francis, etc. And they really started to organize the people of the Virgin Islands. In fact, the labor movement was very strongly organized in the Virgin Islands before the strikes that took place in the rest of the Caribbean in the 1930s. We had done all of that by 1915, 1916. But they went further than us. So that's one difference between the Virgin Islands and the rest of the Caribbean. They went further and they got people in office and they moved them to independence. We got stuck with unincorporated territory. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My next question, I'm going to target two individuals on the podium. I'm going to target Ms. Shalana Brown, and I'm going to target Ms. Joanna Bermudez. I want you guys to chime in on this one. To what extent did the 1848 Emancipation contribute to the development of an independent cultural and artistic expression in the Danish West Indies? How has this heritage continued to influence the cultural fabric of the U.S. Virgin Islands today? Ms. Bermudez?
Okay, good afternoon, buenas tardes. First I want to say thank you, Stacey, Congresswoman, for inviting me, and it is lovely to be here with my colleagues and friends, and I also want to thank everyone for coming. I first want to, if I may, address a little bit of what Mr. Gerald Manuel was talking about, because as I was preparing for this, I was looking back at 1848 and the occurrences and how far along have we moved. And in one of the records, there's a talk to Congress about, it's called the State of Department of the United States and the charge. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, which I usually don't get, but it's a charge of Denmark, okay? And in that statement of 1862, which is very important to read because it's talking about bringing in Africans from the United States to St. Croix, to Congress between Denmark. And at the same time, they're discussing our relationships, our love relationships, and how we are not to be, as free laborers, as free people, to be having relationships with property owners. So there was a lot of concern, and if you had attended, which some of you have attended, Ms. Tanisha Bailey-Roker's presentation on Anna Haggard, this was very important that here in 1862, there's a document that's being sent to Congress, to the United States. This is prior to us being bought, which Lincoln already had an eye on us to purchase in the 1800s. But this particular document moved me because it was all about what Ms. Bailey-Roker was talking about, which was the influence of Anna Haggard and love, not as this thing of she our mistress and this and that and she's selling herself. This was a very important aspect of how we gained our freedom. To roll that back a little bit, if I may, I want to also talk about what Mr. Hector Bermudez-Zanone documented among the Maroons, and that these Maroons, as we know, as my indigenous ancestors, because of the first attack of the el cabo de flechas de Aros que ocurrió. That is so important for St. Croix and for the Virgin Islands because it puts into perspective when we're talking about art, because we know that the indigenous people of the Virgin Islands were crafty indigenous people. Now, within Mr. Bermudez-Zanone, who is not related to me, even though I call him cousin, and he's from Puerto Rico, within his papers, he discusses a long-term relationship that has not well been documented between the indigenous people of St. Croix and Puerto Rico as Maroons in the 1600s. So when it comes to art, and what happens in 1848, and based on the research that we've all seen, we know that the Danes, this is generally speaking, we know that the Danes were quite, this is the truth, quite cruel in the way that they handle our culture. We know that people were migrating way ahead. People were escaping by the thousands to Puerto Rico and Vieques for their freedom and coming back. So this aspect of exclusivity has to also be looked at, because the drumming was probably one of the biggest influence. It's relevant to 1848, and it's relevant to the fire burn, right? And so we have these mixing of cultures that we're not discussing that really has everything to do with also my ancestors, who are African and indigenous. I think in the Virgin Islands, when it comes to the arts, particularly in filmmaking and painting, we're missing the mark. We have been focused, and it's not necessarily, like you were saying, Gerard, it's not necessarily our fault, but if you think of like this is a very new process, right? From 1800s to 1900s, we have our freedom. What do our politicians, our community, even my great uncle Candido Guadalupe, who was senator at large in the 50s, and Ron DeLugo and Walter I.M.G. Hodge, I am Hodge, and these pillars of our community, right? By the 1940s and 50s, they were already making laws about what was our future like. They were not discussing the arts and the selling of a painting and the worth of paintings, or the selling of a film, or the documentation of a film. So that economy is lacking, is still lacking. We're catching up to Puerto Rico, I hope. Particularly in film industry, we're still quite behind, which many of you have heard me speak about that. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. We have a lot of catching up, and it's because we've been so busy focusing on how to reclaim our self-empowerment, and at the same time, we have not seen, and missing the dollars of the arts, we have not seen for ourselves that art, selling books, makes money. We have to pay taxes and everything that's sold. So hopefully this conversation can continue, but we're just touching on that.
I tell her, you are excited. Ms. Brown.
Thank you for that, Joanna. I think about imagination being an art form, and so for persons who are enslaved to have enough imagination to believe that they could have freedom is an art form in its own. I think that it is our responsibility to also imagine, and when we think about liberation and liberty, when those persons, enslaved persons, was fighting for their autonomy, for their freedoms, did they want us to be comfortable, or did they want full liberty for ourselves? And that's what a lot of the artwork that I personally make probes into. Am I living truly liberated, or am I living in a comforting situation? And so when we think about art, we also have to think about the possibilities of being absorbed. So every time we turn on the television and somebody's selling a cereal, or an imagination of a black body, or our thoughts and dreams and hopes, or economic prosperity, does it fit into the imagination of ourselves, or are we absorbing? It's called acculturation, it's called assimilation. Do we have enough imaginative memories from our former selves to imagine ourselves truly living liberated? And so as a counter to that, I personally engage in imaginative arts. It's my counter when I put up a tree, that we are still very connected to our environment, where our ancestors, before there were schoolhouses, were teaching each other. I choose to take photos of young black women in a state that they don't normally see all the time, that they can imagine themselves other than what is always dictated to them, and they feel they must absorb. I think we miss that imagination is important to our liberty and how we want to see ourselves, and not where we think we should be, or what other greater nations think we should be, and what our comfort is, but are we truly living the liberation that happened the next question would be, it is true, in 1848, 30 years later, we had another revolution, because did we truly imagine ourselves the whole way through? And so we say here now, 175 years later, and the question remains, how thought out are we allowing ourselves to imagine? And are we resting in comfortabilities? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And don't worry, I come into the last question. I got one for that too. So good, that's a good one. My next question I'm going to ask to Mr. Macmillan and Ms. Tiffany Yannick. How has the memory and commemoration of the 1848 Emancipation been preserved in the U.S. Virgin Islands? And what significance does it hold in the collective memory and historical narrative of the local society?
Good afternoon, everyone. Those of you who are in the front might not see that it just keeps filling up behind of you, which is so exciting, that the room is just more and more people coming in. So thank you guys all for coming, and thank you to Delegate Plaskett for making this possible. The question is about whether or not, or just how have we commemorated 1848, and maybe we could also say,
and the significance it holds in our collective memory.
And how it's significant in our collective memory. It seems to me that Virgin Islanders, we have done a good job of holding our cultural legacy inside of individual people. We have in our community so many cultural bearers. These are our artists, our historians, our educators, our dancers, our musicians, our writers. And I think we have done a really good job of cultivating individual culture bearers who can carry this forward. At the same time, though, when we think about what Dr. Emmanuel called like turning the wheel completely, like doing the full labor of the work, it seems to me like alongside honoring our cultural bearers and preserving our cultural bearers and seeking them out and supporting them and funding them and these kinds of things, that we also have to consider our institutions and consider the administrators who pull together the institutions that can preserve this legacy in a way that I think would be more beneficial for the Virgin Islands. If individual culture bearers are not available, passing away, busy even, right? I have 3 children. I'm often unavailable, for example. Or just for whatever reason, people get sick. You know, these are real, if our culture is housed only in our individual bodies, then that means it's going to be a lot harder for us to find the culture, especially for Virgin Islanders who may be abroad in the diaspora for college, for work, what have you, but also for Virgin Islanders who have not yet been born and haven't met those cultural bearers yet. So I think it's, I think we've done a good job. I also think it's very important that we honor our institutions, fund our institutions, and also educate people, young people and even people who are in this room, to think about ways in which you can use your talents and skills as an administrator, which is also requires talent and skill to help preserve our culture in institutions, whether they be online or they be brick and mortar ones, so that we can go and find those things. And so we're not, reinventing the wheel and not always dependent on specific individuals to further those things. Which is, I have to say, I want to give a little big up to the July 3rd art show that's going to be happening in part for our 175th, which is an example of a space that we can go to actually like see our culture and act. But we need to support those institutions more so that they can be preserved and stick around.
Thank you. Mr. Macmillan.
Good afternoon, everybody. By training, I am a mental health clinician, and the work that I've done surrounds trauma. And we can't talk about revolution, and we can't talk about where we are today without discussing trauma. During Hurricane Maria, I was with my grandfather, and every time I think about it, I get chills. I forgot the mop bucket outside the house, and when I woke up, my grandfather was pounding on my door saying, Tariq, get up. the water coming in, the water coming in. And I went looking for the mop bucket, realized that it was still outside, and had to take up every drop of water with all the towels in the house, and then wring them into a bucket, pour it into a toilet, and then go back and do the whole process over again. I probably did that for about 4 or 5 hours. Every single time it rains, and every single time I work out and I lift and I feel pain here, I remember that night. When we talk about the collective memory of 1848, trauma is maintained in the body. And every single action that we do today, every single action that Virgin Islanders that aren't here yet will do, is a reflection and is dictated by that traumatic memory. So when we talk about how we preserve the memory of 1848, we can't talk about that in a vacuum, because every single revolution, every single action since then has been dictated by that. When we look at 1848 and we talk about a revolution that wasn't full, or we didn't, I think that the verbiage is we didn't turn the wheel completely. Mm-hmm. The fact that we needed another revolution after that, and the fact that we will need revolutions after that, and after that for the rest of the time that we're Virgin Islanders, is how we've held the collective memory. This is probably one of the first times I've spoken on a panel in the last maybe 4 years about anything related to Virgin Islands history, revolution. Because when I first decided to talk about things and learn more about the history, it was around the centennial. And the response that I got, I have a minute left. The response that I got to it was really mixed. Some people were, yeah, Tariq, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And others were, you need to stop. There were times where I was threatened. There were times when people told me about all the horrible things that are going to happen because they're in the rooms where those conversations are happening and you need to stop. And because of that, I stopped. This is definitely the first time I've said this publicly. I've talked to my wife about this so many times, but I felt embarrassed. I felt like, what kind of activists to stop talking about things because there's fear of what might come later? And that's just the trauma of it all. And I have to imagine that seeing the outcome of 1848 and seeing people be punished and seeing the need for a revolution 30 years later is part of the trauma that I feel, and that's how I'm connected to that collective memory. And I think that's how I answer that question.
Thank you. You know, we've definitely come a long way because the room is open in how the world is so open right now in terms of how we spread information from one to another. And these conversations are important because we intermingle in a space now that we weren't mingling in before. You know, and the digital space right now, we meet each other without knowing the person on the other end. So sometimes these messages that come to us, that linger in our mind, we have people all over the world want to ask us, what is it that makes us who we are? And that part of our collective memory is what we talk about in terms of 1848 and beyond. And to y'all's point, it's in almost everything we do. You know, and even Congresswoman Plaskett stood up here and spoke about that, knowing who she is. And as we look at different aspects of our history, 1733 and beyond, and even coming forward to where we are now, all that is part of it. And I thank you guys. Thank you once again for your answer. Dr. Suwa, my question is, do you believe Denmark should provide reparations for their involvement in its slave trade and slavery in the Danish West Indies? No, you don't give me a yes or no and then just drop the mic, you know.
Mr. Thurland, thank you so much for that question, and also to Congresswoman Plaskett, and to each of you who came out today. I also want to say thank you. To be honest, my short answer is yes. When we think about how wealth is accumulated in the global north or in countries that were colonial powers, right? We understand that that wealth was built off of the backs of people who were captured, tortured, and enslaved. And so when we have emancipation as a particular juncture in history, we know that emancipation is not a totalizing event, that freedom is always an ongoing project that each and every one of us are actively participating in. And so those nations that have profited off of histories of exploitation and torture, yes, I would say they have a moral obligation to provide reparations to the descendants of those people whom they have enslaved. And I would add to that by saying that in the Virgin Islands, we are on the front lines of a climate crisis. We are experiencing environmental destruction and degradation. And when we look at the Caribbean, we recognize that we are not major contributors to the climate crisis, but we face the repercussions of the climate crisis at a rate that is higher, quote unquote, than people of other areas. And so our reparations are not just for slavery, right? They are also for contemporary forms of oppression, contemporary forms of disadvantage, for the psychic warfare that we have endured for centuries. And one of the things that I will say for us as Virgin Islanders is that I like to quote Frantz Fanon everywhere I go, right? Because he says that every generation has to find their mission in the freedom struggle and fulfill it or betray it. And if our generation is to have an opportunity to fulfill our mission, the truth is that we are going to need resources in order to do so. And I have to say, for the 175th, I found myself feeling heartbroken, right? Because in living in these Virgin Islands today, we have the climate crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have a fiscal crisis, we are literally an education crisis. We are grappling with so many traumas, as Tariq said. And so if we are going to celebrate emancipation, we have to ask ourselves, who are we becoming? What is our political project? How do we deal with the continuous colonial subjection that we face? And how do we intend to move forward as a people? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to, and since your answer is yes, I'm gonna go with you first. I want you to give me a specifics. So how do you think it would benefit the current generation in the U.S. Virgin Islands? So how, in other words, what would appropriate reparation be? And maybe not just one thing. I mean, listening to you just now, it is not gonna be one thing. So, but go ahead. And how, for whatever that is, how could, for the generation now and for the future?
I feel like reparations can take so many forms, right? We could get the forgiveness of debt, because we recognize that we also have our fiscal crisis being rooted in a debt crisis. There can be resources provided for education, resources provided for housing, resources provided for healthcare. There can also be resources provided for constructions of national museums that allow us to tell our story, and archives, so that we can continue to own our history. I think that a lot of us, especially in academic spaces, have grappled with the distance or the lack of access to our archives that we have as Virgin Islanders, and what it means to know who we are without necessarily always having direct access to the primary sources. And though I think it is a privilege and an honor, right, that we have relied on our oral history and our local record keeping in the access of our archives, I think that there are just so many ways that we can use these resources. And so I would say, as it relates to the question of specificity, I think sometimes we have to pitch these questions back to the colonial power, right? And ask Denmark when and where and how might they be willing to apologize and or provide reparations.
Okay. You know, Anybody else on the panel wants to talk about reparations? Ms. Brown?
When we talk about reparations, we talk about Denmark, but reparations from the United States as well, because I don't see how freed people can be sold to another colonizer. So when you say reparations, I don't necessarily think that is just to Denmark, but it's also to the things owed to us from a nation that said that they were going to build us up, and then we had to fight for some sort of liberties that we live at this moment. We still do not have complete representation in their institutions, hence our Congresswoman here. And so I just wanted to talk about that as well, because it's still baffling to me how people can be sold when they are free.
Thank you. Ms. Mobiles?
I think obviously my colleagues are right on the money. And one of the things that, with one of the travels that I did to Denmark through Monica Marine's curation of work where I presented my film Sugar Pathways, for me, I had such great anxiety to see the petroglyphs because, again, I wanted to connect with my ancestors and that story. And I had the honor to do so. How many of you have seen the actual petroglyphs or stones in St. Croix, in the Virgin Islands, or in Denmark? Or in but the petroglyphs that were taken from Salt River, have any of you seen it?
Mm-hmm.
Myron Jackson. And you did. And you saw them where?
In Denmark.
And this is what we're talking about. On a spiritual level, on a real deal situation, when our artifacts, when our people's things are removed, we're equally as lost, because we don't have an ability to go and pray and do libations and whatnot. When it comes to reparations, it's extremely important. We know that when we deal with governments, it's always, just to get a grant is difficult. So imagine you're going to tell them, give me some money for reparations. The question of reparations, or what we need to really hold Denmark to its ground, and the reason I refer to my travels there is because when I ask about these memorandums of understanding, what's the deal with that, they say that don't mean anything to them. They put it under a desk. Now, it's insulting, particularly because when you have these memorandum of understanding that our governors and that we as a people have worked so hard to get our governors to do something about it, bring our archives back, give us money to create our museums, have our things here, it's insulting to me ask a basic question, and the question is, they don't care. So in that sense, what we do need to do is hold accountability, where we are not just we're not just writing a little sentence or a paragraph or a document, but we're actually having a course of action, if I may. The course of action is discussing what exactly do we want, bringing that up as an awareness, and also having it as an action plan with deadlines and dates. That's how it's done, because what's happening is that we're missing opportunities such as energy. Denmark has great renewable energy resources from the 1800s and forward. They have a great academic that some of us ancestrally have benefited from, but none of our Virgin Islanders are benefiting from. We're talking about they're genetically in progress. And these renewable, sustainable energies are not being discussed, they're not on the table. And I think in the sense of reparation, we need real, tangible things. You want to give us no money? Let me talk about giving us what we want and need, and in writing, and that you're constantly going back to it. But it has to be extremely practical.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Annie.
I would like to return to Shalana's original statement about the importance of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
My training is as a literary artist. I'm a poet and a novelist. And a lot of the work that I do is mining my own interior self to write what I'm up to, right? Sometimes I mine my own interior life, and then I go into the archives and do the research. But maybe you guys have heard about the Happiness Project. Have y'all heard about this? They do a study across the globe as to where the happiest people are in the world. And the Scandinavian countries continuously rank as the very happiest. Denmark is among the Scandinavian countries. And when you do the research into why they are the happiest country supposedly, and even the Danes, the other Scandinavian countries, they report back as individuals and as a nation that part of why they are happiest is because of their access to the arts. That's it. They say this is what it is. Those of us who want to do art, which I think is all of us, have access to do the art. Our government supports that. And to me, when I think about how do we envision freedom, we have to be able to imagine it first in order to then enact it. And I think part of why we didn't complete the turn of the wheel is because we couldn't yet imagine what would it be like, okay, we're going to free ourselves from slavery. Okay, good, we're done. But we weren't done. And if we had had more time, more space, more access to imagine bigger, to imagine more bravely, we might have been able to do the completing of that wheel and then not only gain our manumission, but gain control over our own futures, which we had not been able to do and we still have not been able to do. So I think that investing again into ways that we can honor our imagination by supporting the arts. I think in the Virgin Islands, we are doing a lot of work to support the sciences, and those are very important. But to support the arts, that's how we're going to get to a greater, more brave version of freedom.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our first set with these panelists. I want you all to give them a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. As the panelists make their way off, we do have the Congresswoman coming up to give a presentation.
Thank you very much. Are you guys enjoying this? Great. Thank you to our first round of panelists. And while they're making their way down, I would ask that Greg Richards, if you can come up with your group. I know Mr. Doward, Alexis Doward is here. And I know, Greg, you wanted some other individuals to come up with you as well, right?
Actually,
I see
like to
Ms.
have-
Betty Wilson.
oh, Miss, both of them. Actually, that's the two men that I mentioned.
They said they don't want to. We're going to bring it to them?
Is quite able-bodied. Ms. Moorhead, please. Please.
So we are, as we know, we are now having our 100 and, yes, we asked them, oh, you're going to bring it. Okay, we are now having our 175th Emancipation. But for many of us on St. Croix, every year we celebrate emancipation, right? And the individuals who have been providing space for us for so many years, I ask them to come up so that we can recognize them for the work that they have been doing all these years. So I was able to get a certificate of special congressional recognition that is presented to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow Emancipation Commemoration Committee in recognition of through dedicated efforts in our community to preserve Virgin Islands history and culture. And so I'm presenting it to the president, but also to the other members, and if you all want to say something.
Thank you. Thank you, my Congress lady. My Congress lady. I am honored, but more than that, I was given the privilege, over a decade ago, about 12 years ago. The honor was bestowed upon us. Now I bestow this honor back to them. And this is who's missing is Pamela Richards, but before us we have Miss Betty Wilson and Miss Peggy Moorhead. They passed the torch to us. They did it big. They continue to support. And again, this doesn't happen every 25 years. This happens every year. It should be the biggest celebration in the Virgin Islands ever. We come out in droves for the 4th of July just for fireworks. We don't come out in droves for this lesson, and that needs to change. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Betty Leona Wilson. I was born, raised, bred, and fed in Freedom City, Frederiksted. And I always have my partner with me, which is Peggy Moorhead. Okay? And we decided when Peggy was approached by Mr. Clifford Christian, and he said Rotary can no longer put up the lights, they can no longer continue, and he wanted us to take it over. It was a struggle. We took it over, we got some money from the legislature, along with Pamela Richards, she joined us, did our financial work, and it took off from there with Positive Nelson, our senator. When he was in the legislature, he made sure that we got funding. Once he got out, that was it. So we decided that we will do fundraisers, and we decided that we are going to light the town on Christmas time, and we're also going to do emancipation. Could you imagine me and Peggy running behind the donkeys out of St. John? St. John Penn and the commissioner, what's his name again? Roy Rogers and the gentleman at Jones. Our first donkey race was held at the racetrack. Instead of the donkeys going one way, they ran down to the sea. And we decided that was too much space, so then we finally moved them into Frederiksted in the ballpark. And that was going good until the storm came, the ballpark went down, and then we took them to agriculture. And we were going from there. So I'm glad to see that we have a lot of other people now interested in emancipation and can come out and take over. You all see I'm in a wheelchair. Peggy getting up there also. We turned it over to Greg and Anita and all of them. So we want all of you in here to sign up, join, and assist and help. I don't want to see you on 4th of July, not that we don't celebrate that. I want to see you in emancipation. Okay?
So we have one video, and then I'm going to read a letter, and then the next group is coming up. Okay?
The United States Congress, I want to wish everyone in the Virgin Islands a happy... On behalf of the United States Congress, I want to wish everyone in the Virgin Islands a happy Emancipation Day. 175 years ago, your forefathers demanded their freedom, and through great sacrifice, they won it. I may not be from the Virgin Islands, but as an American, the meaning of this day speaks to me. And what's so striking and fitting is that it falls just one day before Independence Day in America. What a connection between two important moments in our history. It just goes to show that America is more than a country, it is an idea. And together we will continue working to build a more perfect union.
Say something to us all, and so I'm happy to provide him that space. But we do have a letter that came in that I wanted to share with you all. This is from the Vice President. I'm deeply honored to send my warmest greetings and congratulations to the people of the United States Virgin Islands as you celebrate the 175th anniversary of emancipation. Throughout history, the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands have demonstrated immense courage and strength in the face of adversity and injustice. As only the second formerly enslaved people in the Western Hemisphere to gain freedom through rebellion, Virgin Islanders have long demonstrated to the world the extraordinary power of determination and resolve. I am grateful for the incredible contributions of Virgin Islanders to our nation, including as physicians, business leaders, engineers, athletes, and artists. Through their brilliance, their leadership, and their culture, the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands strengthen the fabric of our nation. This anniversary reminds us all of the history that far too often goes untold. May this celebration motivate us to continue to fight for freedom, equality, and justice. Signed, Kamala Harris.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. At this time, I'd like to call up our next panel members. Once again, Mr. Gerard Emanuel, Ms. Jessica Samuel, Ms. Monica Marin, Mr. Ashley Scotland, Ms. Summer Sibylle Brown, and Mr. Amari De Souza. Let's give this second panel a round of applause again for coming up here. I'm gonna open up this panel with a question to Mr. Gerard Emanuel, kind of set one of the tones for us here. Mr. Emanuel, what were the key social, political, and economic changes that occurred in the Danish West Indies following the 1848 emancipation? And how did they shape the trajectory of the Virgin Islands society today?
Okay. Thank you. Before I answer that question, I want to say something. I am an elder, and I will be in this business probably maybe 20 more years, and I really feel comfortable in retiring from this because of these young people. And I must say one more thing before we do that, Mr. Moderator. We left out the most important person that has really been involved in the revival of emancipation, and that is Mr. Mario C. Moorhead. Because when he was celebrating it in the 1960s, who were afraid to call ourselves black, who were Negro? Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
And then after he did that with Yucca for a few years, you had Hortense Rowe, Mark Milligan, Angela Sheen. They formed Viaco, I think Virgin Islands something corporation. And they continued it until Felix Francis was able to get a bill in the legislature to make it a holiday. So we have to honor the people who started this thing. So let's give a round of applause to Mr. Mario Moorhead. All right, now that I've given my kudos, I answered that question already, but basically I left out some things. I think we need to focus on since Ms. Bermudez was here, I forgot to mention about the importance of the Hispanic community. Because I remember growing up in Christiansted, and we didn't need to leave Christiansted to buy anything. Some Puerto Rican or some other person who had some stores selling everything, whether it was marbles or tops or food or clothing or shelter or other things that we can't say here, the Puerto Ricans sold it. And they have become a very important part of our community since the 1800s. And if it wasn't for Ms. Bermudez, who tries to document this thing very much, a lot of it would go over our head. I don't think the younger generation, I see people here who I know are my age, they would appreciate it. But if you go to Christiansted today, Mr. Turlan, you don't see any of those stores anymore. You go to Fredericksted, almost all the Hispanic stores gone. But the young people who are here, I mean, I know a lot of them, and I'm going to shut up now. Let us hear from them, because these are the people that are going to be running the Virgin Islands pretty soon.
Thank you. And in talking about letting the young people shine, I'm going to call up Ms. Saida Carter to give her presentation.
With me at the podium, I invite Soleil Rogers and Cadence Milligan. I am very happy to share today with you a small fraction of a wonderful project that Stacey Plaskett graciously invited me to conceive of and carry out with my students. I too graciously obliged. And the reason I did is I want to make sure that we always center our youth, okay? If we don't widen the circle and start to include our youth, all is lost. We indeed are one of the 4th murderous places in the world, and that is because we have to intentionally create humanity and make sure that that happens. And like Joanna and Shalana and Monica, some of you, I truly believe that the arts humanizes. So we endeavored in this Emancipation Project to do 2 very interesting things. We created both historical monologues where students would envision themselves living during the time, whether they would be an enslaved person who had a rebel energy and spirit, or an enslaved person who wanted to sort of make it work, whether they would be a colonialist planter riding back home to Denmark, whether they would be von Scholten himself or Anna Haggard. So the students worked with Kevin Molinar and George Cannon III and created a wonderful glut of work that will be housed on a YouTube channel. We're in the process of putting that channel together and creating curriculum to go along with it so that my fellow educators can have something interesting to look at with their students as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring up Miss Soleil Rogers. She's going to share her monologue live, and then me and Cadence are going to talk a little bit more about the process that we conducted, and then you're going to get to see some of the recorded videos. So again, I thank Stacey. I'm going to feel like I'm on a first name basis. And there were 11 students that took part in the project, and only 3 are on island, a testament to our students finding great opportunities for summer educational engagement, travel with family. So we also invited our fellow complex graduate, the 3rd person next to Mr. Gerard. I insisted to Tioni that there be a young person on the panel, and Mr. D'Souza is a 4th year civil engineer student at FAMU, and he is a Pan-Africanist and a Rastafarian. So thank you so much. First up, I welcome to the stage a generation later of one of our culture bearers, Mr. Blinky McIntosh's granddaughter, Miss Soleil Rogers.
Good day. So this monologue is titled, I Am Anna, and it is from the perspective of Anna Haggard. Hatred follows. Why can't people just see me for me? I am not the people I'm associated with. I am my own person, I have my own morals, and I speak for myself. Do they even know who I am? I am Anna Haggard, the mistress of the well-known Governor General Peter von Scholten. Some people may call me confusing, others may say I'm beautiful, strong, and intelligent. Some people only see me as the spoiled consort of a man they couldn't care less for. But some may also say I'm a traitor. Many don't bother asking about me and how I came to be. Quite frankly, many people don't care, but they should. I've always had strong opinions. I've also always thought the most important thing in life is freedom. For some, that seems impossible. Growing up, I've always tried my best to understand. I've always tried putting myself in their position, but I wonder, why don't they just try to find a way around all of this? I mean, there's always a way, right? I know many people aren't very fond of what I've done. Every time I explain to someone new, they look at me with censorious eyes. I was just doing what I had to do. I've always relied on my wits, charm, and beauty. It was my strong suit, so therefore, why not use what I know best? So what? I'd form relations with the island's wealthiest and most powerful men. Eventually, I crossed paths with von Scholten and was officially considered a prosperous woman. Success is assured when you know what you're doing, and even those who know what they're doing fail because they don't know who they're doing it for. Everything I do is for my freedom, but also to give my people a sense of what freedom means. I feel guilty sometimes. I mean, I have 15 slaves. It's all just part of what I have to do to be free. I wish everyone would understand that. I'm trying my best to make a name for myself that has nothing to do with my background or the people I surround myself with. Can't they see what I'm doing? I was bold and recently insisted the Governor General change the ways of those that commanded before him. I assisted him in making the workday a reasonable length. No more slave auctions will be occurring. You pregnant slaves get a break because of me. My people, you and your children, have stable places to live and can have an education now. I even helped with barriers for free Black and colored people. I'm trying to make you feel comfortable in social gatherings. I've always had strong opinions, but I refuse to waste my time trying to explain to those who choose to be stubborn that I have done more for them than they know. You can all continue thinking my mentality is based on betrayal and lies. I suppose someday it'll be up to others to tell my side of the story. Thank you.
So we're going to just debrief a little. So the young people had the opportunity to pick any identity, write from any perspective. I didn't necessarily edit or censor. I encouraged them to use what history was readily available. They may not necessarily share the perspective of the character that they created. But just to talk to these young ladies, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, what grade you'll be heading to, and some of your other activities besides me trying to monopolize your time in the drama club.
My name is Soleil Rogers. I attend the St. Croix Educational Complex High School. Aside from being in the drama club, I'm also on the dance squad, and I'm a part of student council. I try my best to get involved with anything as regularly as possible. Sorry, I'm going to 11th grade.
Good afternoon. My name is Candace Mulligan, and I'm a rising 10th grader. I'm a part of the magnet program. I am also a drama student, and I am a part of the close-up program as well. I also participate in the tennis team for my school on the varsity squad.
So about 1 more minute of processing. I'm going to ask these ladies a few questions about their craft, and then we're going to go straight to the video. So obviously this is not real, factual, 100% history. So we're using the concept of a historical fiction monologue to start the conversation about what indeed the real history is. What is our level of access to the real history? How can we increase that access? And how can we keep the energy going so that our children are really excited about knowing who they are as Virgin Islanders? So could you tell me a little bit about the process, what you enjoyed, how I annoyed you, anything about it that you could speak to, and just what you can envision doing with this kind of work in the future?
So my writing process started with, of course, doing my research, but there was very limited research, so I had to but try to talk to people who I feel could give me some insight, one of them being Miss Carter, of course. And I found out some things that nobody ever talked about, such as the fact that Miss Anna Haggard had 15 slaves. And aside from assisting Von Scholten with some things, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, I tried to make it seem as though she was defending her actions, because some people may see her as more of, I don't want to say a villainous character, but that's what I'm going to say. And others may see her as somebody who did some good. But she's defending herself but not trying to seem like she's begging for you to like her, because she's also a very prideful woman. So, yeah, that was my process.
All right, and lastly, we'll bring up Miss Milligan now. She had the unfortunate, you'll see her monologue portrayed with Kevin and George's work, videographically, beautifully done, but she didn't necessarily agree with the opinion of her character. She didn't necessarily agree with the opinion of her character, but in order to provide context for what could have been a possibility during the time. Not everybody is ready for revolution. So talk a little bit about your character. Sure. Your voice is quiet, so let's give you this.
Well, my character, she's an elderly woman who is against the 1848 emancipation due to her fear of being tortured and getting caught. So basically what I did before I started the writing process is I researched facts from both sides. So I researched facts from people who were for the emancipation and who were against it. So I dug into the history of it. I did my research on 1848 emancipation and real life stories of slaves who were tortured and caught due to, I guess, trying to rebel against the Danish government.
So these girls, give them a big round of applause. And you can sit down and get a good look at your colleagues. So there are several other students. I will make sure that we send a message out to those of you who left your email when the YouTube channel is ready. And let's take a look at the work.
I'm tired. And I refuse to continue to be enslaved. If we want to be emancipated, if we want to be free, we must fight. We must fight them for our liberation. It is currently 1847. We should not have to wait 12 years. 12 blasted years to be free all the way in 1859. I don't know how long 12 years is. Most I don't even live that long. So what? Our children could be free, but what about we? We must revolt under the leadership of General Bordeaux. We must gather our cutlasses. We must grab our canines, matches, whatever else we gonna find around the house, and demand Peter von Schoten that we be emancipated, and show him that we will do whatever it takes until he grants us our wishes. So come July 3rd, we will assemble in front of Fort Frederick. Then we will go past the police station and we will demand Police Chief Anderson that he give us our freedom. If we must, we will destroy the house of the assistant chief, tear out the whipping post they like to whip we with, or burn down William Moore's store. We walk like dogs, day and night. We're repeatedly treated like less than, and mark my words, I refuse to let it happen any longer. We must break this cycle, not only for us, but for all those who may come after us. That slave master like to take me for a joke, but we about to show them that we ain't joking. If we don't fight for ourselves, who will? Listen, I want my freedom, and I demand it. Clear the road. Let us save them pass. We go for our freedom. General Bordeaux and the others plan to march down to the fort and demand their freedom. They plan to rebel against the Danish government, and I, for one, want no part of it. Some of my fellow Africans who just come to the island want part in rebellion. But I have lived in St. Croix since I was a little girl, and there were plenty plans for rebellion before this one. but the Danish them always figuring it out. So me know why the people them think this one gonna be any difference. I want to be free too, but at what cost? We already get food, water, and a roof over we head. Me know what else we need. I have a fear that this rebellion is going to change the way how the Danish treat us. I could already see them increasing the amount of labor hours and giving us punishment for things that ain't even punishable now. If Governor Peter von Scholten don't grant us our freedom after this, the soldiers them gonna be ordered to punish all who been involved and execute them in the most wicked ways. They will most likely be placed in the small iron cages in the sun, pinch you with the red hot tongues, or burn you alive on the bonfires. Long ago, when I had just arrived from Africa, an elder in the community told me a story of how they sent 10 slaves participating in the rebellion in 1759 to foreign islands in the West Indies, where they were probably treated even worse. Because an enslaved labourer named Kojo rat out some of the co-conspirators, and they take a blood oath too. So I stopping one odd man out like Kojo from ratting out the general and the rioters involved. Listen, Governor Peter von Scholten already had a plan to end slavery over time. In 1847, it was decided that all the slaves then would be free in 1859. Plus, some of the British and French islands are already starting to become free now. So me know why we can't just wait for our freedom. Or like me, be a good worker and do the job till it's done.
For the longest, there was no need to think because they did the thinking for us. There was no need to cry because crying only led to more pain, and no need to live because we have lived only to serve them. But those needs are no longer, because the time is now. We have waited long enough, we have fought long enough, and we have suffered long enough. Words cannot bring them to understand. So we're going to use force to make them understand and to make them realize that we are just as dangerous as them. If they ain't going to understand true reasoning, we're going to make them understand true fear. And fear is something that we all understand too well because we live in it every single day of our lives. But that fear we live in only make us stronger. Our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, and our children have died to these people's hands. Their promises have been broken time and time again. And our anger has reached its maximum. The wait is no more. We don't want change soon. We don't want change tomorrow. We want change now. With their gunpowder swapped with sand, and every single last one of you have courage to take a stand without having to wait of the mercy of someone up above or even the mercy of someone else. Equality and justice gonna be reached by our very own hands.
Man, I cannot continue to be living like this. Will the people after me also have to go through such pain and suffering? You, tell a friend to tell a friend. Gather up on the west side of the island. I have a plan. Everyone come, gather up. I have an important message. You, remember when you was beaten senseless for not cutting enough cane? You, remember when your child was taken out of your arms and transported to our next plantation? You remember when master hold you down and rape you? Well, on the morning of July 3rd, I gonna blow this your conch shell in the name of freedom, and we shall all unite and fight for what's right. I gonna tell Von Scholten to give us equality and freedom, for our people have been treated wrong for way too long. I'm going to tell him that we replaced his gunpowder with sand, so he has no weapons at hand. He will declare us free by the afternoon, or his entire place going to be burnt down very soon. He needs to give us the freedom that he enjoys and we demand. He will have no choice. He will be surrounded. So just follow the call of this conch shell.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Like I said, there's about, it doesn't like me. I'm very loud, but I'm very loud, and I'm teaching young people to be very loud. You have to loud up or lose out, okay? And right now, we've seen our other two Virgin Islands losing out. So I think we're like the last bastion for trying to create some freedom for children of color on this island. So I really enjoy the work I do at the St. Croix Educational Complex and with my adult ensemble, Act Out. And I'm just so proud of them. There are about 7 monologues and so far 4 interviews, and we're still conducting interviews. Some of the very panelists that you saw here are being interviewed, and I just want to thank the delegate one last time for setting me on a path. Whereas I was on this path before, I've decided to step a little bit more lively. So thank you.
Minor technical difficulties, but we get it together. Thank you. Thank you, Saida, and thank you to the young people. Let's give them another round of applause. I wanna say the same energy that Ms. Carter has now, she's always had it. This is my high school classmate. And let me tell you something, in terms of giving back to the community that has nurtured her, I mean, this is outstanding. The students talk about her even after they graduate and move on. She has looked back for them. She has pulled them forward. I have spoken to Mr. D'Souza before we started here. She told me, hey, listen, I have a young person to come on the podium. He is here. You've seen what she's done with these other students up here. It is a beautiful thing, and we need that to continue. And believe it or not, this is also being done throughout the Virgin Islands school system. She is not alone. She is one of the loudest, but she is not alone, okay? They're still getting the mic up, but I have some panelists here, and let me get my questions together for these panelists because I want to continue with the program. All right, so we already had Mr. Emmanuel. And this question here is to, I'll start right here with Ms. Sibylle Brown. You know, we've been talking a lot about, of course, 1848 and artistic expression. I want to know about how do you believe that 1848 emancipation thereafter contributed to the development of the independent cultural expression in our community?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Summer. I want to big up the young people and big up their parents as well and the community that surrounds them, right? Children don't raise themselves. The school system is a part of it, but the parental unit and the unit of support that really allow young people to excel, and it's clear that that's happening here, and sometimes we don't highlight that. Also, I just want to say I'm happy to stand on the laurels of my ancestors, right? Like centering that we are all here because somebody did work before us, whether we like it or didn't like it, that's debatable. But the question is how I feel 1848 forwarded the development. Independent cultural expression. Independent cultural expression. So I have two thoughts, right? And they're actually conflicting. One of them is that it didn't. Right? In 1848, the part of what we don't talk about is we go on to 1878, we go on to 1917, and like that wheel didn't turn, right? So the full independent cultural expression of who we are has yet to have been realized because that liberatory experience of fully imagining our whole free selves or be having the capacity to go back and fetch what was taken from us, we have still been denied, right? So we are an interpretation of a people who still don't have access to what is ours, nor do we have the full freedom to create something new because it's tied to the reparations and the resources necessary to do so, right? So that's one strain of thought. We actually just have taken the colonialist, capitalist, oppressor's system and re-embodied it as a form of liberation, right? So we're 1848, 175 years. I am grateful I am not an enslaved person, and also imagine that I am not completely freed. The other thought goes to what, when Miss Yannick was up here and talking about how we hold that in our interpretations and display as people, in our clothing, in our language, in the poetry we're writing, in the art that we're making, right? Even I have the freedom to say these things. It has formed, it has shaped, it is morphing, right? It is rolling, and I still feel like we're seeding complete versions of liberation. So to Dr. Sewer's point, right, this is an ongoing process. And so I do see myself when I pass a row house, I do see that cultural independence in Shalana's art. I do see it in Lavon Bell's art. I see it in Joanna's film. I saw it in these students, right? The cultural expression of when we say, we this man, and I were talking about the difference between Kiara and Ka, and Payude, and Komeno, right? So like in our language, in our writing, in our food, it is there, and the other side of my brain is like, to the point is it really complete? So I don't, it's like we're in a tug of war, we're in a tension, and we actually do have to decide as a people whether we want to remain comfortable, again, to the panel before me thought, or we want to, again, to the panel before me, embrace the revolution and actually complete our version or betray it, and that tensional question hasn't been answered, right? So I'm in attention. I don't think we've moved on, and I have completely acknowledged all the growth that we have embodied forward.
Thank you. I firmly see what you're saying, because culture is also like history. It keeps on going and going and going. And we can't stop it. It's gonna happen. So to your point, that's beautiful. My next question is to Ms. Marin, and I want to give it also to Dr. Samuel. The education trajectory in the U.S. and to the U.S. Virgin Islands also, especially in public education, is structured to prepare our students for the workforce. What courses from kindergarten should be implemented with the inclusion of our history to diversify this structure? For example, what do you guys look at in terms of entrepreneurship, cooperative education, volunteerism, these things, because we see where our students, like the youngsters, came up and they gave what they do. What job are we gonna force them into, with that spirit that they have, and how can that be cultivated in our school system? So if,
I can take that.
Dr. Samuel, since you were closest to me, I don't know you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasant good afternoon. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett and her entire team for organizing this event and for having us. It is truly an honor. To the question of education, I think what's really important to note that in this conversation of emancipation, to paraphrase and quote our very own Dr. Carlisle Corbin, he says that emancipation is in fact incomplete without the very final stage, which is self-determination, right? So we oftentimes refer to and think about emancipation as though it is and was an event. But as we've heard from other panelists and scholars and historians, it is an ongoing process and project that we must daily commit to. I'd like to say and believe that education is actually one of the many prongs of that process, if not the most important one. And I think one of the things that we have to consider is, what do we do with education as an actual platform by which we do a few things? One is continue and sustain culture. Two is provide economic viability. And three is to cultivate an informed citizenry. So at its highest form, I believe that public education is actually its best and most productive when we think about how we prepare our students to be critical thinkers. What I would like to see come out of our education system is actually campaigns around informing them about what it means to be American, to struggle with this issue of status, and to consider what their future can and should look like. I think we should be really harping on civic participation and civic education within our schools and within our classrooms. Too often, our students don't even understand what the real relevance of any of these questions are. Why should they care about emancipation? Why should they care about this issue of our status? Why should they care that we are technically a colony to the United States? But if we don't do the work to inform them through the types of history we're providing them, right? The type of culture we're providing through our education, then they're not going to see the relevance. And then we are going to have an ill-prepared generation of people who are meant to be leaders. So for me, it's not simply about, of enterprising, absolutely, the arts and innovation, certainly, but also what are we doing by way of teaching them about their civic responsibilities. I want to see citizens who are informed and know that being a part of government, being a part of the electoral process is necessary for their own sustainability and viability as people of this place.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Samuel. Thank you. Ms. Marin?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure.
So I can answer it in its entirety.
Okay. The education trajectory in the U.S. and the USVI is structured to prepare students for the workforce. What courses from kindergarten to 12 should be implemented to diversify the structure? I had stated, for example, entrepreneurship, cooperative education, mandatory volunteerism, along the lines of the emancipation spirit.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Delegate Congresswoman Plaskett, for having us here. I'm a big believer, and again, obviously I'm partial in the arts, but project-based learning that's interdisciplinary. So when students can actually go into a project and they're able to really interact with, whether it's the sciences or the arts, and have that full engagement, that's really when it makes the most impact. And I see that missing, and I feel like theater and a lot of the other arts, do that. Theater is a really important one because, you're getting you're getting visual arts, you're getting, literature, you're getting other things, other disciplines. So students really learn the most, when you're activating all different parts of their brain. So that's my take on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. D'Souza?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a little nervous, I'm sure you can tell. Coming up in school in the Virgin Islands, I felt like the school system was kind of rigid and constrictive in a way because I don't think we embrace students that don't think conventionally. You know, you say school is to prepare us for the workforce. It teaches us to be obedient, follow rules. I mean, that's well and good, but that sounds like being a slave to me. So I think they don't want us to color outside of the lines. They always want us to color in the lines. So I think we have to embrace, you know, those like nebulous, out there kind of thinkers instead of just the people who want to be part of industry. That's important as well, but I think we have to embrace the students that aren't thinking the way we want them to think, I should say.
Thank you. Hold on. You hold on there, because this next one, you said something very interesting, and I'm going to steer it to Ashley, Mr. Scotland, and to you, but let me deal with Mr. Scotland first. The political status of the U.S. Virgin Islands is an unincorporated territory of the United States, where we are not fully integrated into the U.S. Should we move towards independence, statehood, or remain the same? What would your option, maybe not any of these, look like?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. That's a tough question because, I mean, it's something that we know in this community has been debated for longer than I've been alive. I believe the question of status and deciding what we want, I believe it's something that the community, that would be my first answer, should be involved in. But first, I think that we would have to be educated on what that means and how it looks. Now, if we go back to 1848, and we talk about that day and what it meant and the freedom that was given to our ancestors, we also don't talk about the period that happened, the apprenticeship period, and all these things where the free slaves were then bonded to different plantations, and it was a step forward from slavery, but it was almost like they were still slaves because Denmark still had their economic engine that they were still trying to conserve and save at the time. And so 1878 had to happen for some of those constructs to be dismantled, and we're still continuing to deal with that today. And so in connecting it to where we are, to the question about status, is we have to know and be educated on what each of those things mean and making sure that we as a people are ready for the steps that are next. And so that we don't move from one stage to just to say that we're making a movement, where we have that day, that moment, and then we end up in another situation where we didn't necessarily contemplate it all through. But I just wanted to, also touch on the last question where we talked about, education and how to do it. I mean, one of the things that the delegate, the Congresswoman, spoke about earlier is the reason why she's able to be who she is in Congress is because she knows who she is and whom she is and where she's from. And I think in our educational system, one of the things that we have to start moving to is ingratiating all of our history, not just in history class, but in all the different disciplines, from the sciences to the maths. And I think those are the things that our students will then know who they are. And that, I think, will empower them to be who they are. He talked about the differences in learning periods. Well, our ancestors all learned differently. And I think that being able to understand who you are, I think gives you the confidence to do things in all different genres, whether it is in the arts or whether it is in the STEMs or you get involved politically active or anything along those lines.
Thank you. Mr. D'Souza, I want you to touch on the question of political status for Virgin Islanders. Tell us what's on your mind concerning that.
Well, the Virgin Islands is an unincorporated territory, correct?
Yes.
I I mean, if we look at that word itself, the etymology of that word, the corp part of a corporation, America's a business. So I think certainly we have to, certainly we have to seek our independence, because this capitalist system is backwards. It's, well, you guys made me lose my train of thought. Yeah, the capitalist system is backwards. Like, think of me going to college. I'm trying to get my family out of poverty. I go to college, I have to take out loans. They won't forgive these loans. Now I'm in poverty. That's how the whole system works. I can think of it with the heat. The heat. They sell you air conditioners. Air conditioners burn fossil fuels. Makes the earth hot. You need air conditioners again. The whole system works on itself, so you need it. So if we're gonna seek independence, we have to think of the thing that's the antithesis to capitalism, and that's socialism in my eyes. I mean, obviously we're still gonna have to stay in this capitalist system for a while because it's working right now, keep on all these unnecessary lights, but there's systems and things we can lean into. There's 6 resources that the 1% use to control the rest of us. That's food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, and education. Once we have control of those things, then everything will be all right. When the people have control of those things.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Summer, I want to know, I'm going to ask, this is a question I posed to Mr. Emmanuel earlier, and I want to pose it to you. When you're looking back at from 1848 to now, what are some of the key political, social, economic changes that you see have occurred during that time, and how have they shaped us today? And that could be from a cultural point of view, that could be social. What things have you seen in your society, even within the past 30 years, in our contemporary times? Have you seen them?
So let's start with the political. There hasn't been a true transfer of power for many reasons, right? Being an unincorporated territory, and Mr. D'Souza just mentioned the word corporation. We live in a state where we are under a corporation, but we're actually not shareholders. Right? We don't get to come to the table to vote. We actually don't benefit and control resources, right? And so a true transfer of power where we're in a semblance of self-governance, right? But actually dictated and predicated by the Department of Interior and the US government. We're debating about whether we're going to go into a conversation about status or constitutional convention. Again, really the US Congress there, that supersedes any decision we could ever make, so we have to make them within federal guidelines. So, we were talking about exercises in futility, and Dr. Sewer and I in the car, she's like, this is an exercise of non-consent, and we do not have the ability, even if we did create a constitution of our own, to consent because it's superseded by another power. So a true transfer of power politically. We're only 67 years old, which means we're very young, right? So some of the growing pains of self-governance are there. We're not the only unincorporated territory experiences things. We have a lack of economic development. We don't have a true economic base. We haven't figured that out. We have weak education systems, right? So the 6 things that Mr. D'Souza mentioned, over the course from 18 to 48 to now, we haven't did a side-by-side true cost accounting analysis to answer the question, have Virgin Islands truly progressed, or just has money increased in value? And so are we in the same conditions as our ancestors? Now, we don't have shackles, granted, right? But what is the true discernment of progress and growth? And are we looking at the global situation that we're currently in because we're so busy being a localized body? And that's why I'm talking about political transference, that we're not even, so we don't understand local economics or how our positionality, being at the front of climate change, being where we are, actually plays on a global scale of how money is going to flow. Who's talking about BRIC nations in here? Which one of our senators on the Senate floor have the political prowess to engage effectively with the House? And I'm not blaming them. I'm saying that really has not changed. So in many regards, we have went backwards because of the false sense of comfortability.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I wanna come to Ms. Marin, because we're talking about a lot of issues here that come back to our young people and to the fabric of who we are. And I want to come back to this question I asked. I posed the first set before, and I posed part of it to Summer. To what extent did the 1848 Emancipation contribute to the development of an independent cultural and artistic expression in the Danish West Indies, and how has that heritage continued to influence the fabric of the U.S. Virgin Islands today? Because I know that from your position as a curator, and so you can speak to that from us, please.
I think we have a very powerful history of activism in both the arts as activists, and even thinking just about the oratory skills of Hubert Harrison, and I mean so many, Edward Blyden, and even our former Congresswoman today. So, a lot of that art still is alive, and I feel like it's very, it's really the backbone of what makes us so powerful. And I think that the 1848 Emancipation and the 1878, the fire burn, planted that seed of resistance that really helped shape, the Virgin Islands, put us on the map in really shaping transnational radicalism. If you really look at the Harlem Renaissance and you look at the arts, and then even our own, Dr. Gloria Joseph, Audre Lorde's partner, I mean, starting the Women's Coalition, I mean, that is arts and activism. And, we see Saida Carter today with Act Out Ensemble organizing young people. So I really do see that, the artists are activists, and that is our tradition, and that was sparked with 1848, and it continues today.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Samuel, I posed this question to the last panel before in terms of reparations. And the specific question I'm going to ask you in its totality is, do you believe Denmark should provide reparations for their involvement in the slave trade and slavery in the Danish West Indies? If yes, in your opinion, what would be an appropriate form of reparations from Denmark to address the historical injustices of slavery in the Danish West Indies? And how do you think that your answer would benefit the current generations or future generations of Virgin Islanders?
Thank you for the question. Honestly, I'm going to pivot your question, if that's okay.
Yeah, pivot.
And I'm going to say a few things. One is that I think Dr. Sewer answered really robustly. It was really comprehensive. I agree. I do think that the answer is yes. I think that's an obvious answer. When I think about one of the key ways that reparations could occur for the former Danish West Indies by Denmark would actually be through the form of educational access. So for those of us who don't know, just on Thursday, our Supreme Court of the United States decided to overturn affirmative action in higher education. This is of utter importance to all of us. Why? Because affirmative action, unlike what is popular misunderstanding and misconception, actually is a proactive approach in providing access and equity to historically disadvantaged and disenfranchised students. So now, universities and institutions across the United States are unable to factor in race, which is a marker, right? It is an indicator that someone typically came from a historically depressed, oppressed, disadvantaged, and disenfranchised background. That means that the onus of providing a robust and comprehensive education now squarely lies on us. We, as the curators of our educational communities, as the creators of our educational institutions and entities, we now have the fullest responsibility to ensure that our students, who are majority BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where 98% of them in the public school are Black and Latino, right? We are dealing with the students of color who are now going to be disenfranchised and are not going to have access to higher education. So to the point of reparations, I think that this is a central opportunity and moment for places like Denmark to consider how to create open lines of access to their universities to our students, right? Free of charge, right? And not on a cherry-picking level, but across the board. I think that if we want to be able to access higher education and go to the happiest place, one of the happiest places on earth, then we should be able to do so, right? Free of charge. So I think that that's one of the main ways. I agree. I think that in terms of funding our institutions, getting grants is difficult. It is hard. It is a lot of work. Give us money and stop asking us all these questions. Give us the money, give us the money, give us the money. We know what we're doing with it. We have all of these plans, these visions, and these ideas, so pour it into us so we can pour it back into ourselves and future generations. So yes, we need reparations and then some.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I want to open up that question to also Mr. D'Souza. If you could give us your thoughts on the question of reparation. If you want me to read you the question in its totality again, you want me to do that? The question was, do you believe Denmark should provide reparations for their involvement in the slave trade and slavery in the Danish West Indies? And if yes, in your opinion, what would be an appropriate form of reparations from Denmark to address the historical injustices of slavery in the Danish West Indies? And how do you think it would benefit the current generation of Virgin Islanders and future generations? I'm sorry.
Well, I think certainly yes, we're owed that. But we first have to designate in no uncertain terms what it is. If you want freedom, you have to show what freedom looks like. So in that way, I've heard like renewable energy. I think that's a good one because that's a perpetual thing. That's something that lasts generations and generations. I think the thing with money is corruption and things like that. It convolutes the whole conversation. So we need things that keep going for generations and generations.
Thank you. Scott, Mr. Scotland?
The question has definitely been adequately.
Just one more thing.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said the question has been adequately answered already, but definitely yes. I think we need reparations. I mean, if you look not just in Denmark, but if you look across the other colonial powers, when they ended slavery, the slave owners got reparations, and so if we're going to have I think that should be the first context that we look at, is that somebody that lost, what they considered free labor was paid. What about the people that were unjustly taken away from, their land and from their people, from their culture, and then supplanted someplace else, and then enslaved and put into various conditions? So definitely, I think on the part when we talk about reparations, and I think this is, maybe to Mr. D'Souza's point, when we talk about the corruption, when we talk about money, when you deal with it, is that the reason why it's an uncomfortable conversation for people to have that have, wronged us, is because it's, in their mind, we're taking something away from them, right? So whatever the resources that we're transferring, in this world, in this capitalist system, there is a cost that is associated with it. So whether it be renewable energy or access to education or grants, and I think that is the dialogue that unfortunately they don't want to have, because they look at it as this is something that we are taking from them, and that belongs to them. And so I think, you know, having the discussions internally and quantifying really what we are owed, and not necessarily going and asking, but demanding and presenting it as a bill that needs to be paid, I think is something along the lines in which we can start to have those type of discussions. Because I think if we continue walking into rooms and asking, I don't necessarily see that as a viable path forward, especially in the system that currently constructs and deals with our world economy as it is today.
Thank you. And you know, one moment, Mr. D'Souza, to your point, right here in the Danish West Indies, when slavery ended, the plantation owners here were repaired. And many of them, and we can actually see how they were repaired today by looking out even in the parking lot here. If you see a plantation that has a chimney on it, that chimney was built with money from when they were repaired from Denmark. Yeah, so those plantations you see, because when they moved from, it's clear, when you see slavery ended here, steam generating power was starting to put into effect in plantations throughout the colonies. And St. Croix was no different than those places. And some of those plantation owners took that money that they got for the loss of their property and invested in those steam engines, and then you see the chimneys built, some of them, and one of them in right down here, and by Lower Love, by agriculture, you see them. You know, some of them falling down. But those, to your point, that is exactly, they were repaired. So, like the questioner said, what about us? You know, Mr. D'Souza.
It was just a short point, but when we're asking for reparations from Denmark, or demanding it, I should say, we have to be wary of an agenda that they have, because that is also a capitalist country. They won't do anything unless it stands to turn them a profit. We see it in Africa now. China's helping develop their infrastructure, build roads, but what do they want from us? Yep. So we always have to be wary of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to say, I'm gonna come to that point because you're absolutely right. In terms of traveling, I was able to travel. I was part of the United Nations Slave Route Project, which was put on by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization. And I went to Norway. One of the trips was to Norway. Left here with historian George Tyson. Was able to take 2 students. At that time I was teaching to the educational complex. And as a result of that trip, well, during that trip we were able to see an exhibit from Denmark and the Danish Maritime Museum. And the museum had artifacts that were taken from the Virgin Islands. I was very emotional. There were a lot of tears in my eye, but I was upset. And I asked the Danish Minister of Culture if we could get these artifacts back to the Virgin Islands. He said, I can give you some. I can give you some of the originals, the authentic ones. I can't give you all, but I can reproduce what I can't give. He did, and it's today the Friedenborg exhibit in Fort Frederick Museum on the bottom floor of Fort Frederick when you walk in to the corner. So he kept his word. But one of the things he told me, Mr. D'Souza, in terms of what he wanted, see, United States didn't pay their dues into UNESCO, right? But there's something the Danish wanted us and the Americans who were on the trip to take back. See, when Germany invaded Denmark, and when the war ended, they didn't give back what they took from Denmark. So they were putting that on the table to representatives. So when you're talking, I'm telling you, you may think that what you're saying, hey, is a tit, but it's big, man. You are absolutely correct. There is an ulterior motive. We have to find out what it is. We have to find out our place in it. We can look at St. Croix, 85 square miles. We can look at the entire Virgin Islands, 150 square miles. It might be a blip on a map, but our importance is so real. You know, it is so real. I want to go into a segment here where we have a question and answer segment for our community. And for those of you who are here, and we're going to ask, you know, if anybody has a question, a burning question they would like to ask, we'd like you to come up. We have a mic here. If you, I know we ain't got nobody shy in here, so we're going to do it very briefly, only taking a couple questions, because we strict for time. I see a hand in the back. You want to come up, lady in the purple shirt, and
good afternoon. I don't know if I have to introduce myself. My name is Juliette George. I am with the United Caribbean Association, UCA. Hey. I didn't get here for the beginning, so I missed a good bit of the first panel. But what I have heard, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a very loud speaker. But what I have heard thus far, we are starting this conversation from July 3rd, 1848. What about what led to July 3rd, 1848? What were the conditions on St. Croix? Because emancipation happened on St. Croix. What were the conditions on St. Croix that led to emancipation? And as we stand here today, are those conditions, and I mean not the physical conditions, the emotional and psychological conditions, have they improved? Have they changed under U.S. occupation? That's my question. Thank you.
the first half of a question, speak to Mr. Emmanuel. You want to speak to that for us, please? What went down? I mean,
well, first of all, Mr. Moderator, I would be remiss if I didn't ask the audience to give these young people another round of applause.
Absolutely.
And I see we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. Yes, the conditions that really caused the enslaved to rebel were just clearly that they were enslaved, but they also thought that freedom was already granted and that the enslaved people were just holding it up because they were just bad-minded. Today, we're in a similar situation. We don't have physical slavery. We have economic slavery, as he said. We have political slavery. And the only area that we seem to be succeeding in is in culture. But we have to deal with the politics, as Dr. Jessica Samuel so astutely mentioned. And until we deal with that seriously, we're going to have problems.
Thank you.
What's the top? Wait, what's the top?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. And I just wanted to also respond to the question as well. I know the person who asked the question wanted to focus on St. Croix, but we also have to look at what was going on in the region, in the region, because that had huge impacts on what happened in 1848 in St. Croix, and that helped lead to our emancipation from, you know, the British ending slavery in their colonies to the discussion in Denmark amongst some abolitionists in their Congress. I think a lot of the leaders of the revolt recognized this. And so they also understood the timing of what was happening. So, you know, Peter von Scholten moving to ending slavery 12 years later and giving free and allowing newborns to be free, that didn't happen in a vacuum. You know, that was something that was regionally happening, and it was something that was being pressured, not just in Denmark, but across the region. And I think we must give credit to our ancestors of understanding what was happening and recognizing the leverage that they had in those moments. So it wasn't just an isolated and vacuum event where they decided to take the freedom. It was also recognizing, understanding what was going on in the region and recognizing this was an opportune moment for them to make their move.
One of the things, and on that point, thank you, and on that point too, if you look at the court records of emancipation, some of the newly freed that spoke said that they knew what went down in Haiti, for instance, and so that came from their own mouths.
I want to add to the question that the young woman had about what was happening prior to the 1848, what was happening just as it occurred. It's important to note that in Mid-Island, these conversations were happening. So the first time that day occurred was happening out of Mid-Island. So I wanted to express that as well, that it didn't just start in Frederickstead, it actually started in the center of the island and then spread it.
My name is Roland Roebuck. I'm one of the advisors to the Committee on Emancipation. My question is this: what is our collective commitment to engage with Africa, especially those nations from which our people were sequestered from?
We have members of the first panel too, if anybody wants to speak to that from the first panel, but also the second panel.
I can say something to that. I think we definitely have to work with Africa, not just with Africa, with other Caribbean countries where Africans are also located. But Africa needs to get free as well. Africa is not free themselves. So we have to do what we can in our side of the world with these higher powers, the United States. You can see in France now, they're having rebellions because they killed an African Muslim boy. The empire is falling. This is our opportunity now. So we have to do the work. We have to put in the work to get there for all African people to come together.
I agree. I think that this notion of collective commitment is really important because it forces us to contend with our identity. You know, I think that a lot of us as Virgin Islanders have spent a lot of time doing a lot of infighting, and that very dark history we don't really talk about, you know, but there was a portion in time in recent history where it was very much so West Indians against Banya people, and, you know, me, you ain't a second generation Crucian and this and that, and it created a lot of fissures that have still yet to be healed. And I think that before we can even think about the Atlantic, across the Atlantic and the continent, and we should, absolutely, we need to begin within our Caribbean Sea. And in fact, we need to begin within our islands, right? And so for me, I think the collective commitment has to come with repairing the harm that was done during the 60s and 70s, right? Around this alienation of aliens people, how we used to talk about that, right? And then it's about considering how do we now fit within the context of the Caribbean as a wider region, right? So what does it mean that CARICOM exists but we're not a part of it, right? What does it mean that we have yet to create formidable relationships with our brother and sister islands, and that we can't even fly between islands freely, right? I have to constantly go to Miami to come down to St. Vincent and St. Lucia. That is unacceptable. And so in these very practical ways, we see that there's a division, that we have yet to think as a collective body and a collective unit, and we have to begin right here at home, confronting our very dark past in the ways that it shows up, and considering how we connect to one another within this region.
Thank you.
I'm not a panelist, but in the words of Sizzla, the reggae artist, I will never give away a continent for an island.
Good evening. Cletus Emmanuel. If you go to heaven, well, when you go to heaven, Brother Emmanuel is going to be there. He going to bring up November 3rd, 1733. That's one of his passions. That's one of my passion also. 23rd. What did I say? 23rd, sorry. July 3rd. We're here talking today about July 3rd, 1848. We had 1848, we had 1733, we had 1878. We're talking about these Virgin Islands historical events, and we're talking about moving forward. But our children, and I was very excited, Saida, my classmate, very excited to see the youth, and I'm very happy to see Mr. D'Souza on the panel. I was excited today, because I come to all of these forums, and we're excited about the crowd size, and I'm never excited. I'm a little excited today about this crowd size. I am, because when I came to the road right there, I saw enough cars, I said, wow. I love this crowd, however, I wanted to see more of our children, because they're the ones who need to hear this message. Our students don't know a lot about Virgin Islands history. I teach math. I try my best to infuse history into mathematics, believe it or not. When I teach parallel lines cut by a transversal, some of you may not know what that is. When I teach parallel lines cut by a transversal, I get into Virgin Islands elective governors, because I talk about Queen Mary Highway and Melvin Evans Highway, and I talk about who are the other elective governors of the Virgin Islands and what structure is named after them. We're here at the Melvin Evans Center for Learning. Now, my question, I'm going to make a comment, I'm going to ask you to agree or disagree. We talk about 1848 and today, how much we've progressed culturally and otherwise. I would beg to say we have not progressed a lot politically. We have just changed one master for another. Do you agree or disagree? And the master we have changed for is people of our color. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to touch on that?
I'll just quickly say I agree. I feel like I kind of touched on that a little bit, so I'm in agreement.
Good afternoon. I'm very sorry to speak out of turn, but I have a young wife at home. And I have a young wife at home, and she's been texting me for about 2 hours now. I'd just like to thank you all. This is one of, in my own experience, one of the most beautiful afternoons I've ever spent. I played with the 10 Sleepless Nights. I was a psychiatrist here for 40-something years. And in my heart, I feel good tonight. I want to thank you, Congresswoman and cousin, because I'm going to go back to Stanley and the 10 Sleepless Nights and tell them we could dead now. We have people to take over. God bless you all. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Greetings to all. And my name is Joe Paris Jr. I'm grateful and I appreciate and this week of celebrating our ancestors. I'm grateful and appreciate this week of celebrating our ancestors. So I would like to direct this question to the Honorable Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. Under what authority did you introduce H.R. 3026, and what law did you use to implement H.R. 26?
Thank you. The Congress has the authority to adopt the Organic Act as the Constitution. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to have this discussion, but I will just say succinctly that adoption of the Constitution by Congress then allows us to have a Constitution that we can change to the things that we want to have in it. Because as it stands right now, the constitutions that we bring forward have to be adopted by Congress itself. So by utilizing the Organic Act, which is already there, as the adoption of the Constitution, that then allows us and our own legislature, through ratification, to make changes to a Constitution without Congress's intervention. Okay? And I think Ms. Peggy Moorhead had the next question, but one of the things I wanted to say was this discussion that we are having now collectively, I do believe is important. And I think that we need to continue to have discussions like this, not just in July, but annually, periodically, having the town meetings, right? This is our own town meeting, our own collective discussion about, as Mr. McMillan said, our past traumas and other things that are going on within us. One of the past traumas that I wanted to talk about that we really haven't is when we talked about what happened in the 60s and the 70s with the aliens was in part because Native Virgin Islanders had not been given what they were due. So if you were in fact someone who is here and as an ancestral person, those rights and privileges, those lands that other people got when when other people left did not happen for us. And so there's a continual unrealized accounting that has not occurred. And so I think that's something that has not been addressed. That many of us who are ancestral Virgin Islanders feel almost, we're a little afraid to have that discussion about what's due us, that it will feel offensive to those people who are not ancestral Virgin Islanders. And I think that we need to be open about that trauma that's there. You know, we talked about the 60s and 70s. I met a Virgin Island man who discussed the fact that because he was born here and born an American, he was drafted into Vietnam. But those who came here were not drafted. And how did it feel to come back after Vietnam and see people with homes, see people who maybe married your girlfriend when you had left, right? And what that trauma does as well. So I think there are multiple layers that we have not really discussed because we don't trust each other also.
Yep.
There's a lack of trust among us that was engendered by those masters.
Yes.
For us not to trust each other, not to be open with each other about our pain, about the things that go on behind closed doors, that, you know, as my mother would say, what's family business? Don't discuss family business in the street. But we are a family, and we need to have those discussions. Before we move to Ms. Peggy Moorhead, and I wanted to just acknowledge Donna Christensen being here, and thank you so much for the work that you have done. When you talk about Great Virgin Islanders, people need to acknowledge that, you know, in Congress, now there are multiple women who are physicians, but she was the first female physician in the Congress. And we brought her there to do that. And I want to also acknowledge Senator Diane Capehart being here, Senator Maurice James for being here in the audience, former Senator Myron Jackson. Thank you so much for being a part of what we are doing today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I really would not have slept well tonight if I went home and didn't bring up the subject matter. And I'm speaking with the fact that our public school system does not teach our children their history. Everyone seems to be sidestepping the issue today because you mentioned civics, you mentioned, and the young man who were talking about trauma. I think the trauma is continuing because of the deficiency in our public school curriculum. To say that you're going to put integrate, the word that they want to use, our history into all the different courses. Our children are 3 and more grade levels below in English and math. When are you going to be able to deal with the history if you can't even address the math? Let's be honest. I want to ask, how do we continue to grow and develop in a positive manner if we're not going to teach our children who they are.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the panel first if they wanted. You have a question? Okay, but I want to get Peg. Let me remove her to ask first. Somebody comment on it. On that.
Thank you, Peggy, for that question, because I know you've been working on this for years. Ever since I've come home, this has been a question. Particularly, I'm proud of you asking that question, because in preparation to this evening, I had to do a lot of reading, and now I'm all worked up, and I want to share what I've been remembering and rereading. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that I had to go through that process when it should have been a process as a Crucian native young girl, that I should have been already knowing this automatically. And I have to read Eric Slowett's book. I have to go back to Isaac Ducan. I got to go back to my film documentary and remember what all the interviewees were saying. And for example, with Sugar Pathways, that looks like to 100 years of history. That took me 10 years to produce and to raise that money. And still that film is 10 years old. It's being archived at Rutgers University, all over the universities, generally speaking. It's shown at universities, but in the Virgin Islands, that documentary is not a part of the curriculum. And it's 10 years old. It's seen over 1,000 people. The movie has been reviewed over 2 million people. How many of you see Sugar Pathways? Still, that's a good amount, but still, are you missing 100 years of history? And again, I go back to the indigenous aspect of our history. 1493, November 13, them indigenous people. I know it makes it uncomfortable, Stacey, you know, that the conversation comes up of the indigenous aspect of it. But as I said, not uncomfortable to me because I'm a product of it. But the fact is that and I'm gladly to share Hector Bermudez Zanone's work on the Maroons and the discussion of the indigenous people, 2 cultures that became one. African, indigenous. Let we not forget that, please. And I am a panelist for Ayo who reached late.
2 other individuals that are here with us. Former Senator Burt Bryant is also here. Thank you so much. And Senator Carla Joseph is here. And also Mr. Ventura representing Senator Bolke's office. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, I really want to thank you for the opportunity to sit here and listen and say what I have to say. Been here, born here, staying here, me going away. And I think we have a tendency to allow individuals to mislead and misinform our people and our young children in school. This situation here about 1848, we seem to forget over 400 years of incarceration, abuse, rape, you name it, of our ancestors through the Europeans, Portugal and Spain, and in the Caribbean. So we seem to have a tendency to let individuals of the same colonizers and abusers to come and write books, and we try to push it through as this truth, when in fact we know better, I know better. I have a box here with documentation. I was 5 years old in 1948 when then Governor Melvin Evans and all of them come back later on, and I ended up in Denmark to celebrate an issue in the 70s. But I recall because I was there in Frederiksted, and I saw what took place in 1948 when they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of that emancipation. But the whole story is, someday, history would absolve my position that I take, and I don't apologize to no one to express my position. But the hypocrisy in the whole thing is that I know that we, as I stand here and speak, do not have not one person elected to vote in Congress to amend an act from Congress. We can't do it. Don't nobody fool us. What they're trying to push on our children, is the colonization of our mentality in our classroom and the curriculum to believe they can tell us when we're ready to write a constitution for the people of, not people in. There's a distinct difference between a pigeon in a mango tree and a mango. If I don't understand what I'm here. But when I listen to what is being said and promoted around here, if you can name me somebody in Congress that we have right now that can vote to make a revised Organic Act that was never amended by any vote from nobody here, and vote to amend it again, can't happen. That's a joke. We know that. I know that. So when that roll call, see if you see anybody elected from the Virginians voting when the roll is called to amend that so-called revised Organic Act that have been revised and amended so many times. Our fifth constitutional document have never been amended, and if you read it and understand it, right in the pages provide for opportunities for amendment and revision. When you accept a revised Organic Act that have been amended, you're locking yourself and your future generation into deciding that you don't even have a document. And when I get a chance, read the revised Organic Act as amended and see if I will find a preamble in there defining anyone I will look like me. Good night.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Julian Vera. First, I'd like to say there is no question that the governance we have had in the Virgin Islands for the past, well, from 1970, have put a pause or have caused our emancipation to regress. I would like any of the panelists to comment on responsibilities of government and how the government we have had over the past, well, from 1970, has caused us to be in the condition we are in the Virgin Islands today. Thank you.
Dr. Swan.
I really actually appreciate that question, in part because I think a part of our colonial condition is that we don't often have opportunities to really see and to feel and to get a sense of our own power and our own capacity and our own agency. And so sometimes I feel like we often surrender it to an external power. And given that the last question was about education, as a St. Johnian, I feel like it would be totally irresponsible to come here today and to not remind us all of the fact that the children of St. John do not have a public high school on the island of St. John, and that this has been our reality for quite some time. Right? And while Dr. Samuel has studied this quite in depth, I think one of the things that I want to say is, of course, we are now debating this question of whether the Virgin Islands government should engage in a land swap with the Virgin Islands National Park in order for the children of St. John to have a public high school on St. John. And this places the elders of St. John in a very precarious situation, in part because they feel as though they have to choose between land rights, decolonization, and sovereignty, and a basic quality school for the children of St. John. And I'm going to tie this back to your question, which is an important one, in part because as the elders of St. John keep asking, why do we have to swap land with the park that already occupies over 2/3 of the island, okay? This then leads us to the question of whether or not the Virgin Islands government should, of course, pursue alternatives that do not consider the land swap with the park. Now, several alternatives have been put on the table. Of course, the VI government could buy property for the school. They could receive donation of land for the establishment of the school. And there have also been private entities that have stepped forward to say that we would be willing to donate land for the swap so that it does not come from the people of the Virgin Islands. But what happens when they propose these alternatives is essentially people say that they are unable to get the VI government to pursue these alternative solutions. And so we find that to be incredibly heartbreaking as a people, in part because we believe that our government should serve the interests of the people of the Virgin Islands, right? Yes. And it's heartbreaking on many fronts, but also when we're talking about education, I want an education for the children of the Virgin Islands where they know that they are loved and they feel that love in every aspect of how they are educated, right? But what does it say to us that for so long we cannot commit to the establishment of a school on the small island of St. John, but that we continue to treat that island like a cash cow for the territory as a whole?
Nice. Yes. I just want to, I have to tag in here. Thank you so much, Dr. Sewer, for bringing that up. Yes, and as she mentioned, in fact, my dissertation was precisely about this very timely and like current matter. And what I will say is I think right now what we are facing is sort of this dilemma where it seems as though what is not happening with the school on St. John is by virtue of Virgin Islanders' fault, and we have to really reshift and pivot that, right? So I think current discourse is making it seem like St. Johnians are being difficult, and they're refusing to settle on the matter of allowing a school to be built. And at every time they keep saying, hey, y'all, can we actually pursue an alternative to this? What they're really doing is denying their students an education. And I just want to very gently push back against that, because what we're seeing is a deliberate ignoring and dismissing of what St. Johnians are saying they want. And this question, right, this question of self-determination is a question that's linked to this very matter. When we say we want to determine for ourselves what our future looks like, and therefore the future of our generation and our children that come to us, our progeny, what we're saying is that these conversations that are currently happening need to be held with the same respect and regard. St. John's are saying there are other ways to get a school for our children, and it does not have to be the way that they're telling you. And this is one of the strategies of colonialism, making us feel like there are false options, right? That we don't have many options, that there's only one route, and that is not true. There are multiple routes, and we must continue to pursue imagination, as my sister Shalana said, right? If we are not imaginative in the options that are actually at our disposal and discretion, then we begin to believe the false lies that there's only one way to solve a problem. And in math, we know that's not true, right? There are multiple ways to get to the answer of an issue. St. Johnians are telling you what those multiple ways are, and it is up to us and our elected officials to listen. And that's that.
Can I weigh in on Mr. Vera's question very quickly? So Mr. Vera asked a question about the maturity, the accountability, the responsibility of those held in governance from 1970s. And I'm going to do something really radical and pitch that back to the audience. The government don't make itself up. We make the government up. So if we are the people responsible for voting in people who we feel from 1970 to 2023 have failed us, but yet still we're voting in the same people, is it the leaders who point themselves up to vote, or the voting populace that have a problem? We need to evolve as the electorate and take ownership for our apathy in the elected officials that we choose, for the lack of accountability. If you don't like what your senator doing that you gave your vote to, go to your senator office. The reality that 15 people plus the government and some commissioners can and will determine what happens for 150,000 plus is ridiculous. Where is your activism? Where's your civic engagement? Where's your personal responsibility to mandate that the people who run for office are, one, qualified, that the elected officials take their job seriously, and if you don't take your job seriously, you won't be there in the next 2 or 4 years. But every time we're having this conversation, I'm placing it on leadership when the responsibility is actually individually and collectively ours. Our due diligence is missing.
Both. Which goes back to education.
Both.
And civic engagement.
Good afternoon.
And I agree with you. And I agree with you.
Celeste Foy here. And I'm going to continue with the history is industry. And let me go to not just St. John, but how the young people here on St. Croix can't even get across the water to see St. John nor St. Thomas without paying $200 and some to go over there. And since 2014, it was said that we were going to have affordable transportation by Virgin Islands Transportation to get us to St. John and St. Thomas. Now, I'm sorry, I got to pick on St. John a little bit, because we can get from St. Thomas, and I'm a Foy, and we appreciate the fact that the Native Son stepped in, because we had a rich man who was already rich, making more money by bringing out, he got the opportunity to have this contract, and then we got to pay to get on a ferry, and getting richer, talking about opportunities here, and then we still haven't had an avenue for us to go. Now, how did I get so upset about that? Because I was asked to take, some of y'all know I do tours, and I was asked to take, when the Danish students were here, to go and escort them not only to St. Thomas, but also to St. John's. All right? And they got a little upset with me, because when they were asking where were their signs, the students, and why we would take, and we don't have everything basically still in the Danish language. Hello? And I said, well, if you wanted all of that, you should have left the $25,000 that you received for us to continue to do so. And then, so later on, they went and wrote on the blog, I know I'm coming, and they went and wrote on the blog that they had, that I said that we should have left the money. Okay, so let me bring it forward again. So my questions are two. Number one, when are we going to have transportation so we can take our youth to St. Thomas and to St. John's and vice versa, so that they can get the full history of the Virgin Islands? Number one. Number two, history is industry. We're selling the free guts. We're selling the free guts, which is our history, up for auction. Why can't the United States Virgin Islands buy them and do what they do everywhere else, like what's in Jamestown, in Virginia, so on and so forth, set it up, restore those houses instead of somebody else coming in and tearing down our history and turning it into what they want to do, and instead of us being able to run our history so our children can visit those as well.
Thank you. I want to touch, we pressed for time, but I want to touch on the answer for the question quickly, is that the government has moved forward with the RFP is out for a ferry. Now, we don't know what's going to happen once the ferry is built in terms and operational. Once again, it's going to be up to us, the people, to ensure that the ferry is subsidized. Somebody give me that award for the children, for educational purposes, to travel. We want to wrap up now. I want to thank y'all for coming out. I want to give our Congresswoman a chance to come to the podium and say.
So thank you all for coming. First, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Senator Turland. Thank you for keeping us having this discussion, and I want to thank the panelists. Can all the panelists from the first panel also stand? Can you all come up? Can you guys come up? You guys stand up also. I just want to thank them all for being here. So I don't really have much to say. I just want to thank you guys for holding space with us. And I particularly want to say to someone who was up here earlier that I imagine myself greater than you think I am. And that we as Virgin Islanders need to stop downing each other. It's easy to criticize. All of that knowledge and experience that you have should be about uplifting the next generation, not putting it down, not talking about what they can't do, but imagining what they can do. I'm so grateful that I had a father who believed I could do any freaking thing I wanted to do. And he got that from the other Virgin Islanders who believe that for each one of us. So I believe that for our children. I believe that for each one of you. I'm so grateful that we have a panel that looks like the Virgin Islands. It's multi-generational, multi-island, multi-ethnicity, because that's what we are right now. And those of you who want to be allies with us of African descent, I'm grateful for your allyship as well. I'm grateful that you are being a part of this discussion, and I want to thank the elders who've given so much. We had Ms. Moorhead, Ms. Wilson come up. Thank you, Ms. Roca, for all that you do as well. Thank you to so much of our elders. May Adams Cornwall, she brings energy to me every day. I'm always like, please stop with all that energy. I'm trying to be a curmudgeon today. I don't want to be happy with you today. But thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. And I pray that we would keep what our ancestors brought in our spirits moving forward. And that others, I'm welcome. You know, my staff, they're like, oh my gosh, she's got another idea. We're open to other ideas about the next discussion that we're going to have, how we can move forward. Thank you who are artists, who are historians, who are griots, who are teachers, who are business owners, who all the things that you guys do, to healers who are here with us today. Thank you so much for everything. And together, we will be our ancestors' dream. We have one last greeting. We have one last greeting. We call this the speaker in waiting. That's what we call him.
I'm Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, House Democratic Leader, and it is an honor to commemorate the 175th anniversary of the self-emancipation of enslaved Africans from the Dutch-controlled Virgin Islands. The story of self-emancipation 175 years ago is a story of resilience and strength and dedication and commitment and vision and a desire to pursue freedom and liberty and justice and opportunity for everyone. I'm thankful for this commemoration. I'm thankful for retaining the memory of the journey upon whose shoulders we now stand and whose story should be an inspiration for all of us in the continued pursuit of freedom and justice and liberty and opportunity. I'm confident that under the leadership of my friend, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, and the resilient people of the Virgin Islands, inspired by the story of those who came before us, that the best is yet to come. God bless you. God bless the Virgin Islands. May God bless the United States of America, our journey, and congratulations.